Good morning. My name is Special Scoville, and today I'll be giving you a presentation on Medal of Honor recipient Hiroshi Maemura. If you have any questions, please hold them until the end of the presentation. Some background information on Mr. Maemura. He was born to Japanese immigrant parents in Gallup, New Mexico, making him a second-generation Japanese American, also known as a Nisi. Now, originally his nickname was given to him by a school teacher who could not pronounce his name correctly. And Mr. Maemura first attempted to participate in World War II and volunteered to fight, however was denied by the U.S. Army due to being a 4F, an enemy alien. It wasn't until the 442nd Infantry Regiment was he allowed to join. Now, the 442nd Infantry Regiment was an all-Nisi man force and became well known for valorous and determined fighting. After losing some men, the Army requested some additional volunteers for the unit. Mr. Maemura volunteered and was allowed to join. He was trained as a machine gunner and was part of the Champagne Campaign. The 100th Infantry Battalion, 442nd Infantry Regiment, was the highest decorated unit of its size in the whole Army during World War II. After the surrender of the Japanese Empire, Mr. Maemura was discharged from active duty, where he then joined the United States Army Reserve. This is a map of North and South Korea, specifically Yeoncheon, which we'll be talking about in the next slide, of where Mr. Maemura fought, and the capital of South Korea, Seoul. Mr. Maemura was recalled to active duty at the start of the Korean War and served as a corporal in the 2nd Battalion, 7th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division in November 1950. He was awarded his Medal of Honor in April 25, 1951, for his actions at the Imjin River near Taejeon-ni in Yangcheon County, which is near the now demilitarized zone. Chinese and North Korean troops attempted to push into Yeoncheon and take the capital of Seoul. The Chinese and North Koreans attacked at night over a 3-day stretch, attempting to take and destroy Yeoncheon. Our allies, the British, the Belgian, and the South Koreans, were there at Yeoncheon to provide defense. The British bared the brunt of the attack and lost all of their officers. U.S. command told Mr. Maemura's battalion to hold position and cover the retreat of their allies so that they could regroup and counterattack. Now, on the second night, Mr. Maemura's position was getting overwhelmed, and he told his troops to retreat, fall back, and regroup. Mr. Maemura stayed behind, fixed a bayonet onto his rifle, and engaged the enemy in hand-to-hand combat. He killed 10 men before making his way to a medical tent, where he provided aid to wounded soldiers and directed the evacuation effort. Then he made his way to a machine gun nest and laid down friendly suppressive fire on the enemy, killing or injuring more of them. Once his weapon was out of ammo, he disabled it and made his way to a second machine gun nest, where he continued to lay down fire. After he was out of ammo and from taking friendly mortar and artillery shots, he assumed that the brass thought that all the allies were off the hill, and he himself decided to retreat. While he was retreating, he came across another enemy soldier and engaged him in hand-to-hand combat. During the combat, the enemy threw a grenade at Mr. Maemura. With quick reflexes, he kicked the grenade back at the enemy, killing him. The grenade also injured Mr. Maemura, and even with adrenaline pumping, he still continued to retreat. After his body gave out, he played dead, and several North Korean and South Korean patrols went past him, thinking he was dead. It wasn't until a Chinese officer leveled a .45 pistol at his head and told him to give up that he surrendered. After capture, Mr. Maemura was forced to march with little food or water over a long distance, similar to many death marches. Once the Allies counterattacked the Chinese troops and pushed them to the border between North Korea and China, Mr. Maemura was forced to walk a long distance into China. During the march, you were under constant threat of disease or execution. And during the march as well, he was with a comrade of his known as Joe Anello. Mr. Anello was more injured than Mr. Maimura was, so Mr. Maimura had to assist him in the march, carrying him most of the way. While marching, the North Koreans told Mr. Maimura to leave Mr. Anello behind because it was slowing them down. Mr. Maimura initially refused and told them no. It wasn't until Mr. Anello convinced Mr. Maimura to leave him behind did Mr. Maimura finally continue marching. Surprisingly, both Mr. Maimura and Mr. Anello survived the encounter, and Mr. Anello visited Mr. Maimura later in his life in Gallup, New Mexico. Mr. Maimura was forced to march 300 miles over a 5-week period into China. This is Mr. Maimura's Medal of Honor citation. You can read it yourself online, or you can read it here. It's basically just a summary of what I just talked about. Moving on. Mr. Maimura's Medal of Honor was the first one to be classified as top secret. The brass assumed that had the Chinese found out what Mr. Maimura did to their troops, they'd enact some sort of revenge, either torturing him, dismembering him, or killing him outright. Mr. Maimura was forced to walk 300 miles for 5 weeks, but was still held for 28 months, a little over 2 years, before being released. Once released, he was given his Medal of Honor by President Dwight D. Eisenhower in October 1953 at the White House. Mr. Maimura was released along with 19 other prisoners of war at Panmunjom and taken to the nearby Freedom Village on August 23, 1953. Now, Mr. Maimura wasn't expecting to be awarded anything and was actually expecting to be court-martialed because of failing to hold his position, cover retreat, and for losing so many of his men. When General Osborne initially told him that he was receiving the Medal of Honor, he was so stunned he answered, "A medal for what?" This is a show of how much he thought about his troops and what his troops thought of him. Now, Mr. Maimura's leadership displays all the Army values: loyalty to his men and his friend, duty to his country, selfless service in giving aid to wounded soldiers, honor in battle with a superior force, integrity by never leaving his colleague behind, personal courage to standing up to the Chinese and North Koreans, telling them that he will not leave his friend behind. And he is a great and honorable man who deserves all the respect we can give him. He is an amazing person. We should all strive to be like him. This concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I will take them now.